Thank you for joining us today on this very interesting webinar on emotional intelligence. Um, Today's topic is being taken up by Ms. Divya Thampi, who is our expert for today. And thank you for joining us, Divya. Before handing it over and sort of introducing the topic, I'd just like to introduce Divya, who is an emotional intelligence practitioner from 6 Seconds. She coaches leaders and individuals through one-on-one workshops and engagement facilities. She's also a workplace counselor and consults on Your Dost. She has over 18 years of experience across multiple domains and is being part of organizations like Nissan India, Carnival UK, Dell International Services, and Oberoi Hotels. She's a certified leadership trainer. Apart from having facilitated training workshops for thousands of multinational audiences across country. She's currently involved in the design and delivery of custom training programs in the areas of emotional intelligence and coaching. She's also done a signature workshop called Wind Beneath the Wings, which has been very well received by audiences. And today, Divya is here to talk us about the crucial aspects of emotional intelligence and how this can help you not only improve your self-awareness, but also awareness about how you interact with others and improve your communication skills. So before we start, just a couple of instructions also. You can post questions anytime during the talk. The flow is going to be that Divya is going to take us through a small presentation. Post that, this will be open for Q&A. We would encourage all of you to ask as many questions as possible and make this session very interactive. You can post your questions in the chat section or in the question section on the panel that you can see on your screen. And once Divya is done with the presentation, I will make sure to pick out the best questions and ask her in the order that we receive it. We'll try to cover as many questions as possible. The duration of this webinar is set for 1 hour. So post the presentation, we'll try to cover as many questions as possible. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand it over to Divya. Divya, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hitesh. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to have you all. Thank you for taking the time out. And so I'll straight away get into this presentation that we have and talk a little about what emotional intelligence is. So, the other day I was attending a discussion which is going on around emotional intelligence. And one of the participants made a comment. And he said, whenever I get emotional, my intelligence goes out of the window. So by this logic, the word emotional intelligence is an oxymoron. As funny as his statement sounded, I suspect that a lot of people view this whole concept of emotional intelligence with a certain amount of skepticism. So first things first. The word emotional, especially when it is used as an adjective, has quite a few negative connotations. It implies that the person being referred to is overly sensitive or gets offended easily, or he or she has no control over his emotions. While the reality is one of the most important aspects of emotional intelligence is regulation of emotions. However, I'd like to clarify the point that emotions are a significant resource and that each of us as humans have been gifted with this resource. And often we dismiss these emotions as something that gets in the way of being effective. So a little more about how this is a resource. So emotions can play an important role in how we think and behave. The emotions we feel each day can compel us to take action and influence the decisions we make about our lives, both large and small. So emotions can be short-lived, such as a flash of annoyance at a coworker, or long-lasting, such as an enduring sadness over the loss of a relationship. But why exactly do we experience emotions, and what role do they serve? One of the biggest things about emotions, is actually the meaning of the word itself is energy in motion. It can motivate us to take action. So when faced with a nerve-wracking exam, you might feel a lot of anxiety about whether you will perform well and how the test will impact your final grade, or then, whether you're attending an interview, or then you are starting off a new business or going to have an important meeting. It really helps you to perform a little better. Because of these emotional responses, you might be more likely to study or prepare. Since you experienced a particular emotion, you had the motivation to take action and do something positive to improve your chances of getting a good grade or having a better outcome at the meeting. We also tend to take certain actions in order to experience positive emotions and minimize the probability of feeling negative emotions. For example, you might seek out social activities or hobbies that provide you with a sense of happiness, contentment, and excitement. On the other hand, you'd probably avoid situations that might potentially lead to boredom, sadness, or anxiety. Another big role that emotion plays is it helps us to survive, thrive, and avoid danger. In fact, this is one of the primary roles of emotions. They are signals. So we've all heard of Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin, a naturalist, believed that emotions are adaptations that allow both humans and animals to survive and reproduce. When we get angry, we are likely to confront the source of our irritation. When we experience fear, we are more likely to flee the threat. And when we feel love, we might seek out a mate and reproduce. Emotions serve as adaptive role in our lives by motivating us to act quickly and take actions that will maximize our chances for survival and success. So, so that's the one about motivating us to take action. And moving on to, and of course, helping us to survive and thrive. Moving on to the next one, which is allowing us to understand other people. In fact, not only that, emotions also help others to understand us. So when we interact with other people, it is important to give cues to help them to understand how we are feeling. These cues might involve emotional expression through body language, such as various facial expressions connected with a particular emotion that we are experiencing. Now, it's not a case that you have to you have to think of a cue or you have to deliberately give a cue. This is something that we are naturally gifted with, and it shows up on our faces and in our body language. In other cases, it might involve directly stating how we feel. When we tell friends or family members that we're feeling happy, sad, excited, or frightened, we're giving them important information that they can use to take action. Similar is the case in a business scenario when we share with our customers or where we share with our colleagues about a certain level of confidence or a certain level of anxiety. It could help them to help us. And just as our own emotions provide valuable information to others, the emotional expression of those around us gives us a wealth of social information. So social communication is an important part of our daily lives and relationships, and being able to interpret and react to the emotions of others is absolutely essential. It allows us to respond appropriately and build deeper and more meaningful relationship with our friends, with our colleagues, and our loved ones. It also allows us to communicate effectively in a variety of social situations, from dealing with an irate customer to managing a hot-headed employee. Now, another one of the really important ones is that emotions help us to make decisions. Our emotions have a major influence on the decision we make, from what we decide to have for breakfast to which candidates we choose to vote for in political elections. Researchers have also found that people with certain types of brain damage affecting their ability to experience emotions also have a decreased ability to make good decisions. Now, there is actually a particular example which is quoted by Daniel Goleman in his book Emotional Intelligence and Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. So this example is of a man by the name Elliot who was detected with a tumor just behind his forehead, a tumor which is the size of an orange. So he went through a surgery for the removal of the tumor. While the surgery was declared a success and Elliot seemed healthy, people who knew him claimed that he had undergone a drastic personality change. There were some puzzling patterns to Elliot's behavior. Intellectually, he was as bright as he ever was, but he used to use his time terribly. He seemed to get lost in details easily and seemed to have lost the ability to prioritize altogether. Soon his wife left him, and this guy, who had been a successful corporate lawyer, could hardly hold down a job. He also managed to squander away his savings into investments, which led to losses. Now, with no money and no friends, he ended up staying in the spare bedroom of his brother's apartment. Though extensive tests found nothing wrong with his mental faculties, he decided to meet a neurologist in the hope that some neurological problem might get him the disability benefits he was hoping to get. Now, the neurologist he met was struck by a fact. So while there seemed to be nothing wrong with the mental faculties of Eliot, like his logic, memory, attention, and other cognitive abilities, there was one element which seemed to be missing from his mental repertoire. He seemed to be oblivious to his feelings about what had happened to him. He narrated the tragic events of his life with dispassion of an onlooker, without any trace of disappointment or sadness or anger about the tragedies and failures of his life. You know, the entire unfairness of what had happened to him, as if he was speaking about someone else. The neurologist found that he himself was more upset about the life events of Eliot than Eliot was. This became even more evident when at the end of the meeting, the neurologist suggested that they decide on the date and time for the next appointment. Eliot was a muddle of indecisiveness. He could find arguments for and against every date and time that the doctor proposed. He could not choose among them. At the rational level, there were perfectly good reasons for objecting to or accepting virtually every possible time for the appointment, but Eliot lacked a sense of how he felt about any of the times. Lacking that awareness of his own feelings, he absolutely had no preference. In Eliot's case, the medical professionals later came to the conclusion that this source of emotional unawareness was the removal of a particular part of his brain. Now, this is definitely a very simplistic diagram of the brain, so that it's easy for people like us to understand. As you can see, there are three parts to the brain. Just give me a minute. Thank you for your patience. So, as I was saying, there are three parts to the brain. So the human brain has evolved over a period of time. And so as you can see, there's something called the reptilian brain or the instinctive brain, which is what the human brain started off with. And then came the emotional brain, which is responsible for all the emotional responses and experiences that we had. And then later, as human beings evolved, came the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain. Normally what happens is any information that goes to the brain through various sources, so any data that comes through our eyes, nose, ears, it goes to the thinking brain, but it all goes via the emotional brain. Now, what had happened in Eliot's case was, when they were in the process of removing the tumor, the brain tumor, they also happened to sever the connection between the thinking brain and the emotional brain. This is what led to Eliot having no access to his emotional brain. As a result, Eliot's thinking had become like that of a computer. He was able to go through every logical step of decision making, but unable to assign emotional values to differing possibilities. Every option was neutral to him. And that overly dispassionate reasoning, suspected the doctor, was the core of Eliot's problem. Too little awareness of his own feelings about things made Eliot reasoning faulty. The lesson from this example is a crucial role of feeling in navigating life's endless stream of decisions. While strong feelings can create havoc in reasoning, the lack of awareness of feeling can also ruin decision making for us, especially in coming to those decisions on which our destiny largely depends. Things like what career to pursue, whether to stay with a secure job or start one's own business, which could be risky, whom to date or marry, where to live, which house to buy or rent, whether to change the business model, and on and on. Such decisions cannot be made well through sheer rationality. They require gut feeling and emotional wisdom, which is garnered through past experiences. Formal logic alone cannot work on the basis for deciding whom to marry or trust, or even what job to take. These are realms where reason without feeling are blind. So yeah, as Joshua Friedman says, he's a CEO of 6 Seconds. He says that emotions can lead to our worst decisions or our best decisions. The difference is emotional intelligence. Okay. So now let's look at what is emotional intelligence and how does it differ to IQ. So EQ stands for emotional intelligence quotient, and of course IQ stands for intelligence quotient. Let's start with the intelligence quotient. So intelligence quotient is actually a score which is derived from one of the several standardized tests designed to assess intelligence. It is a measure of general intelligence. So it measures the ability of an individual to learn, understand, and apply information to skills, logical reasoning, word comprehension, math skills, abstract and spatial thinking. It also helps in filtering irrelevant information. So what IQ can do is it is the one factor which often determines success with challenging tasks, ability to analyze and connect the dots, and also with research and development. To a large extent, a high IQ will ensure high academic performance. Emotional intelligence, on the other hand, is the ability to identify, use, understand, and manage emotions in an effective and positive way. It can also be measured through a test, the various tests available. A high emotional intelligence quotient helps individuals to communicate better, reduce their anxiety and stress, diffuse conflicts, improve relationships, empathize with others, and effectively overcome life's challenges. Our emotional intelligence affects the quality of our lives because it influences our behavior and our relationships. One of the main differences between IQ and EQ is that IQ is an inborn ability and remains the same throughout our adult life, while emotional intelligence can be learned and improved at any age. So now that we have seen the difference between IQ and EQ, and we have some understanding of what emotional intelligence is, let's dive a little deeper into the various components of emotional intelligence. So there are four basic components of emotional intelligence. The first and the foremost is self-awareness. Second one is self-management. Third is social awareness. And the fourth one is relationship management. In fact, the fourth one, the relationship management, is a combination. It's when you have all the other three skills and you put them together is when you are good at relationship management. So self-awareness is basically the foundational capability when it comes to emotional intelligence. Okay, and let's have a look at how this works. Yeah. So self-awareness is the ability to accurately perceive one's emotions and remain aware of them as they happen. I think an example may help you understand this better. A few years ago, when I just started getting interested in emotional intelligence, I was having a casual conversation with a friend, and he suggested that we go to a traditional restaurant in Mumbai, which had good reviews. I was excited at the idea and mentioned that the restaurant was known to serve some good fish preparations too, because I had heard some reviews too. So this friend was a vegetarian, and he immediately retorted, "If you plan to have fish, maybe you could sit at a different table." I wasn't quite expecting that comment, and I was surprised. He had said it in jest, of course, and our conversation moved on to other matters. An hour after our conversation was over, and while doing some work, I found myself sulking. I realized that I was annoyed, hurt, and resentful that my friend had made such a comment. The funny part is, as soon as I identified what I was feeling and why I was feeling them, there was a shift in my mood. If one is good at self-awareness, they would be able to identify their feelings, the acuteness of the feelings, and be able to establish the reasons that trigger those feelings. The next one is self-management. Clearly, one can be good at self-management only if they are good at self-awareness. So without the foundational capability of self-awareness, the possibility of somebody being good at self-management is reasonably low. Now, what is self-management? Self-management is the ability to manage one's response to specific situations and people and have the flexibility to positively direct one's behavior in response to those emotions. Being able in a study that was conducted in Stanford University in the 1970s, uh, some children were used for an experiment. So one child at a time was called into a room and was offered a choice between a marshmallow, which is provided immediately, or two marshmallows, which would be given to them if they waited for a short period. Now, this short period was about 15 minutes, during this 15 minutes, the tester would leave the room, and then they would return. So the children had two choices. They either could get the one marshmallow they were given and immediately have it, or then if they chose to wait for 15 minutes, they would get a second marshmallow, which they were free to consume. Of course, some children managed to have the self-regulation or get over the need for immediate gratification, while other children gave in to their need for having the marshmallow immediately. In the follow-up studies, the researchers found that the children who were able to wait longer for the preferred rewards tended to have better life outcomes, which included their education attainment as well, their body mass index, and how successful they were in terms of the jobs that they held and also their relationships. Now, as humans, we feel before we consciously, we actually feel before we consciously think. And people who constantly react from an emotional state never wait long enough to allow their thoughts to override their emotions. On the other hand, people who self-regulate have the ability to wait until their emotions pass, allowing them to respond from a place of reason rather than simply reacting to feelings. A road rage is a very good example of this. Those of us who manage to avoid road rage are the ones who are able to regulate our feelings even when we feel angry, and those who give in have a little more difficulty. Of course, there could be various reasons behind that. Moving on, the third capability or third part or component of emotional intelligence is social awareness. So social awareness is the ability to accurately identify the emotions of other people and thus understand the effects of those emotions. So what it means is, it means being tuned into the feelings of others and see things from their frame of reference. This ability is also known as empathy. Children start developing this awareness and the ability for empathy by the age of 2. For example, while a really small child's reaction to his friend crying may be to cry along with her or to try and console her. However, as children grow older, they soon learn that in some instances, the best way to help the other child who's about to cry would be to not call attention to the friend's overwhelming emotions and thus save them the embarrassment. So this is social awareness. Some of us are innately quite good at it, have a natural capability for empathy. In fact, women are known to be known to have a higher score when it comes to empathy, and men on an average are known to have a higher score when it comes to self-regulation. Now, this is an average score that I'm talking about, so it doesn't hold across all people. The fourth component of emotional intelligence is relationship management. So relationship management is the ability to use awareness of one's own emotions and those of others to successfully manage interactions. That is, to provide clear communication and effectively handle conflict. So like I said before, relationship management is a consolidation of all the other three components of emotional intelligence. So another competency that falls under relationship management is influence, the capability to influence others. It is the ability to build a consensus and win people's support by being able to focus on what is important to others as well as for yourself. An example of relationship management would be the choice of being vulnerable when you see that it is going to help others. For example, when mentoring someone, the mentee may be inspired by your achievements and accolades, but sharing with the mentee the failures and tough times that you have gone through, the disappointment and dejection you have dealt with in those situations may help the mentee feel closer to you. It will help the mentee see you as a real person who succeeded despite his or her flaws and shortcomings. Most importantly, he or she may feel more courageous about taking risks and taking action, which may have seemed insurmountable to them earlier. So, and now that we have looked at the various components of emotional intelligence, let's look at the impact of emotional intelligence at workplace. Research has provided clear evidence that emotionally intelligent leaders are more successful. Many of these studies, various studies have been done over the years, and the studies yield bottom line results. So at PepsiCo, for example, executives selected for emotional intelligence competencies generated 10% more productivity. Emotionally intelligent salespeople at L'Oreal brought in about 2.5 million more in sales. An emotionally intelligent initiative at Sheraton helped increase market share by about 24%. The US Air Force is using emotional intelligence to screen pararescue jumpers to save about $190 million. One of the most important applications of emotional intelligence is in helping leaders climate conducive to high performance. This yields significantly higher productivity, retention, and profitability, and emotional intelligence appears key to this competitive advantage. However, the advantages of emotional intelligence is not only at workplace. In fact, it impacts every aspect of our life. One of the biggest benefits of leveraging emotional intelligence is reduced stress and anxiety. We feel a lot more equipped to deal with stress. So it's not a case of we will not be faced with stressful situations, but we would be better equipped. Stronger personal relationships, more meaningful relationships, increased optimism and confidence, better health, effective leadership skills, improved communication, less workplace conflict, and better problem solving. These are some of the benefits. Now that we have spoken so much about emotional intelligence and how it can benefit us at the workplace or even in our personal life, let's look at this a little more practically. What it means to be emotionally intelligent. How can you possibly improve your own self-awareness? Now, first of all, there are some basic emotions. All of us are familiar with this. As you can see here, anger, fear, surprise, happiness, sadness, and a feeling of disgust. These are some of the most basic feelings. However, there are various degrees of these feelings. For example, when you say that you're feeling peaceful, it is a lower degree of happiness. And when you say that you're thrilled, it is a higher degree of happiness. Or when you say that you are feeling skeptical, it is a lower degree of fear. And when you say that you are feeling terrified, it is a higher degree of fear. When when we say that self-awareness is one of the most important aspects of emotional intelligence, what it means is your level of awareness of what's going on with you. Just give me a minute. Thank you for your patience. So so I was saying, so how aware are you of what is going on with you? You may have come across situations where a group of you are chatting and having a discussion, and then an argument breaks out, and then voices rise, and one person tells the other person, oh, don't get angry, and the person who's been getting angry says, I'm not angry, what this indicates is, while everybody else can see that this person is angry, he himself is not aware of the fact that he is getting angry. And this is often the case with many of us, and the funny thing is that emotions don't come one at a time. Often feelings are a combination, come in a combination. So for instance, let's say that you have a child who's in school, and he tells you one evening that he's performed very badly in a particular subject. Now, you may feel angry towards him or annoyed towards him because you think that he is not prepared very well. You may feel annoyed with yourself, and you may also feel guilty, thinking that you could have probably helped him more and spent more time with him. And you may feel sad that an opportunity was lost. So it's generally a combination. So the question is, how often are you aware of what emotion you are experiencing? And even when you are aware of the emotion, do you know to what degree you are experiencing it? Are you experiencing it acutely or not so acutely? Uh, the moment your self-awareness increases, you know exactly what you're feeling and to what degree you're feeling, and this awareness itself helps you in regulating your emotion. Okay. Just before I wind up this session, this presentation on emotional intelligence, I'd like to give you a quick tip. Now, so there's a link between thinking and feeling. People often believe that feeling and emotions they experience are determined by external events, situations, and the behaviors of others. For example, we may hear ourselves say things like, my boss made me nervous, my husband and wife made me angry, the trip to Lonavala made me feel relaxed, or I'm depressed because I didn't get through the interview. Now, what is the underlying assumption in these statements? That someone or something other than ourselves is directly determining the feelings that we experience. We come to these conclusions automatically without asking ourselves if this assumption is true. However, if we stop to analyze the process that links an external situation to our emotional responses, we will find that there is a step in between. What really makes us feel and respond the way we do is often not the situation or the words and actions of another person, but how we perceive that situation or that person's actions. It is how we see something or someone and what we think about it, or then think about it or them, that really influences how we feel. It is our thoughts and beliefs about an event that significantly influences our emotions and actions. Here's an example. Let's say that you went to a party and the hostess introduced you to somebody called Manisha. You've never met her before. She's introduced you to Manisha because you do not know anybody else at the party. As you start talking to her, you'll notice that she doesn't look directly at you, but keeps looking around the room. So, she's almost shifty-eyed. How would you feel if you thought to yourself, this woman is so rude. She doesn't even look at me, and she's trying to let me know that she has better things to do than to listen to me talk. What if you thought had another thought which said, I must be really boring and unattractive. Nobody wants to talk to me or spend time with me. Or maybe there could be a third thought. It could be that Manisha is probably waiting for a friend to come. Maybe she's feeling a little anxious. By now, you've probably realized that you felt 3 different feelings as a result of 3 different thoughts. The situation remained exactly the same. Often we are not aware of our thoughts and beliefs because they are so automatic and happen so quickly. But they are there and they affect the way we feel. A little about automatic thoughts. Just as we are not always conscious of the way we talk or how we drive a car, we are often not aware of our thinking. Some of our thinking is so habitual that it is automatic, and just like driving, when things are automatic, we may not be conscious of them. All of the time, our brains are turning over thoughts and ideas. However, we are not consciously aware of them because it happens relatively fast, and we are not accustomed to slowing them down. Our automatic thoughts, however, play an important role in our emotional well-being. There are three kinds of automatic thoughts. So there are neutral thoughts like, I think I will buy some pumpkin today. Or there are positive thoughts, which could be, this is something I can do well. Or negative thoughts like, I often find it hard to concentrate, I'm so lazy. Automatic thoughts often reflect worries and concern. However, they can be about anything at all, anything we have ever seen, heard, or learned. In addition, it can be anything we know from any source at all. Obviously, automatic thoughts are the ones that cause us emotional distress. People who are depressed tend to think negative thoughts about themselves, the world about them, and their future. It is these thoughts that can be changed to effectively change the way we feel. So that's a little about emotional intelligence and some basics. And now we are open for questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Divya. Thanks for that insightful presentation. I'm sure that a lot of people found useful. So we've got our first questions that have started coming in. So I will start to address them one by one. So the first question that is being asked is that I believe in one of the first examples that was mentioned, how can emotions control be helpful in controlling economic decisions like investments? And I mean, I think what he's trying to ask is that whether emotional intelligence has any influence over a person's economic decisions like investments.
Yes, it does. So the point is, every experience that we have, along with the physical experience and the mental experience, there's also an emotional experience. So just to give you an example, let's say you go to a restaurant. Along with the fact that there is a physical experience, you like the food, etc., there's also an emotional experience, how the people made you feel. Did you feel a sense of disgust, or did you feel a sense of excitement as you entered, or the kind of food that you ate? And your brain stores all this emotional information as well. And the next time you think about going to that restaurant, it is not just the rational reasons that come up, but also the emotional reasons that your brain automatically throws up without you consciously thinking about it. Similarly, when you're making investments, if you have prior experience with making investments, you also have an emotional repertoire with the experiences, with those investment experiences. And whenever so for instance, with a particular stock or a share, you have had a bad experience, which made you feel very anxious or very disappointed, chances are the next time you look at a share, that information also gets thrown up by the brain. But you may not be very conscious about it. So definitely there is an impact of your emotional intelligence on these kind of decisions as well.
Right. Great. So I think there's also another very interesting question by Shivendra. And what he wants to know is that how is emotional intelligence, since it's a behavioral science in controlling your thinking, how is it different from manipulation or manipulative behavior?
Okay, so thing is, emotional intelligence, unlike intelligence quotient, is not just one figure, but emotional intelligence is a profile. It is a combination of four components that we spoke about. And in fact, if people are good at certain components of emotional intelligence, they may choose to manipulate, but somebody who's interested in manipulating, the very the very reality that he is considering manipulation as a very good option indicates that his level of emotional intelligence in some aspects is pretty low. Why I say this is because if your overall level of emotional intelligence is high, then your level of self-awareness is high. And what I mean by self-awareness is that you are very well aware of what you are feeling, what your values are, what matters most to you, what the moral values that you hold in high regard, and you are in sync with those values. And when you are in sync with your values, then the question of manipulation doesn't come into picture. So if manipulation is an option that you're considering very seriously, then clearly self-awareness is one area that you're not particularly strong at.
Right, makes sense. Another interesting question that we have is from Nitin, and he wants to know that how can one judge the emotions of others? Because one can only observe what the other person is saying and doing, and the other person might not be doing those things with full control of their emotions. So would that actually mean that you can judge emotions of others, and how can you go about that?
So empathy, the second part, the third part, which is social awareness, is really not so much about theoretical application of our knowledge of feelings and what a person may be feeling. It's actually being tuned into another person. So if I was to take the example, most of us are pretty good at gauging what either our spouse is feeling, or child is feeling, or our parents are feeling when we are having a deep conversation with them. Nobody needs to give us any training. In fact, if I was to ask any of you that who do you think is the best listener as far as you are concerned, chances are you will tell me, give me the name of some person in your life whom you interact with on a regular basis. So it could be a friend, it could be a parent, it could be a child, it could be a spouse. And the reason why they're very good listeners is because they are, while they're deeply listening, they also understand what you're feeling. So they're not just listening to words, but they're really listening to what you're not saying as well, and they are able to gauge your feelings. They're completely tuned into you. So similarly, so even with customers, it's a matter of being really tuned in. Now there is a glitch, of course there's a glitch. The glitch being that sometimes you may be able to gauge what somebody is feeling, but you may not be able to gauge correctly why they are feeling what they are feeling. For instance, as you're having a conversation with a friend and there is some music playing in the background, and you suddenly notice that this particular friend is looking sad, or anxious. So you're able to figure out that they're sad or anxious, and you quickly do a mental check to see which part of your conversation could have led to the other person feeling this way, and you really can't pin down anything. And the reality could be that it is that particular song which is playing in the background which reminds that person of a particular sad situation or a situation which made them anxious. So that can be a tricky one.
Right. The next question that we have is Vikas, and he's asking that is it actually possible to stay emotionally healthy, and if yes, then how?
So, I would have liked to clarify the question as to what your definition of emotionally healthy is, because often, but I'll just go ahead and answer this question. So, normally, there is this assumption by many of us that being emotionally intelligent also means being happy most of the time or experiencing positive feelings at all times, which is not the case. Emotionally healthy, the definition that I have in my mind for being emotionally healthy is being able to fully experience whatever emotion comes your way, but not getting caught up in the loop, because every emotion has a purpose. So whether it is an emotion that causes you pain, for example grief, or anxiety, or fear, each one of these have a purpose, and as long as you take them in the stride and use them for what they are meant to. So for instance, when you feel fear, you check back on what's happening and you kind of get to the root of the matter. That's helping you. However, when this emotion itself, which is supposed to be a sign, gets in the way of you being able to take an action, then we have a problem. For example, grief. Now, grief in itself, it's built into human beings. There is a purpose for it, because whenever we experience any kind of loss, and that loss could be something to do with a material, we've lost our car, or we've lost the house, or we've lost our favorite shirt, or we've lost a dear one. And going through this process of grief helps us deal with that particular situation, and it is an important aspect. And if we choose to ignore that emotion that we are experiencing, we do so at our own peril, because it gets pent up, and that's when it becomes unhealthy. So when we are not able to express that emotion, when we do not give a vent to an emotion like grief, then it may over a period of time just pile up and show up in the wrong places, and you may have difficulty being fully functional. That's when it becomes unhealthy. So it's absolutely possible to be emotionally healthy, and emotionally, like I said before, being emotionally healthy does not mean that you would be happy at all times, but it means that you fully experience the emotions for what they are, and are able to move forward in life. So I'd just like to check if that has answered the question.
So hopefully Vikas is going to tell us that on the chat section if that question has been answered. Wonderful. So I think one more very interesting question I picked up from Aniket, and he's asking whether introverts generally have a higher EQ than extroverts. So is EQ? I think what he's trying to ask is EQ actually related to the personality of an individual? Both introverts and extroverts can have pretty high level of emotional intelligence. So being an extrovert or an introvert is really not a sign of intelligence or lack of it, emotional intelligence or lack of it. This is more a case of how you choose to express it. So somebody who's an extrovert enjoys the aspect of discussing something more or interacting more with people. So that's a style preference rather than an indication of the level of emotional intelligence. So yeah, being an introvert or an extrovert is not indicative of whether somebody is more emotionally intelligent or less emotionally intelligent. All right. So before I ask the next question, Vikas actually said that the question about emotionally healthy helped him. So that answers his question. Okay, moving on. So we have also Vineet, who wants to know that is EQ a skill that can only be consciously learned, or is it something that is subconsciously built into the learning process as we grow up?
That's a good question. So, what we refer to as wisdom is basically emotional intelligence. And most of us develop some level of emotional intelligence over a period of time. However, we all know people who may have reached a certain age but still seem not to be able to deal with certain situations or certain emotions. So it's a matter of when you consciously choose to learn something, especially so acknowledge emotion. So what can happen is, even when we have a lot of experiences, we may sometimes choose not to acknowledge certain emotions. For example, if a certain situation makes us stressed, and or a certain conversation upsets us, we may choose not to discuss that matter at all. We may not express that it is bothering us, and this may become a pattern. So instead of introspecting and looking at what is happening with me, what am I feeling right now? If I'm feeling stressed, or if I'm feeling sad in this particular situation every single time, why am I feeling sad? this kind of introspection can help us grow. And some of us have a natural tendency to introspect, and some of us may not have a tendency to introspect. In fact, people who go through critical crisis situations in their lives often end up coming out wiser, because they have learned some really important lessons, and they have chosen to learn those lessons rather than just pushing them behind. So yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for just the last 2 or 3 questions at the max. So we are going to take one question which is being posted by Nitin, and he's referring to a term called analysis paralysis. Whether this is linked to emotional intelligence, and if so, then what can be done to actually avoid this?
Okay. So in fact, when I was discussing that particular example of Eliot, uh, that could easily be called analysis paralysis, because what was happening with him was when his doctor asked him to choose a date and time for his next appointment, he kept looking at all the timings or all the dates that were proposed, and he kept talking about why it is a good time and why it is not a good time. So he had an argument for both sides for every single appointment time and date. His issue was he was unable to come to a conclusion, and he was unable to come to a conclusion because he is not able to pay attention to what he is feeling with each of these timings and dates. So too much of analysis, when our brain is completely focused on the logic and pays no attention to our gut feeling, can lead to analysis paralysis.
Okay. So another question by Sandeep. He's asking if there are any ways to control acute feelings or emotions, which are they and how can one practice them?
Okay. It's a good question, and I think this is something that all of us want an answer to. Um, so, some examples of acute emotions are anger, or it could be anxiety, acute anger. These are a couple of examples. Often they become acute because of lack of acknowledgement. So, and our brain kind of gets into a loop where we're constantly thinking about, so for example, let's take anxiety. What is anxiety? You're worrying about a particular situation which is yet to happen. You do not know outcome of some action that you have taken or some action that you have to take in future, and you worry and worry and worry about it to the extent that you're not able to do anything else. You feel stuck and you feel paralyzed. Now, so one of the first things is for us to not try and push away emotions as they arise in us or as we experience them. One of the most important aspects is to acknowledge that a certain emotion exists, and then to peacefully have a look at why it exists and what has triggered of that emotion. There are certain there's something called a 6-second pause. For instance, when you're extremely angry, and let's say you're having an argument with your spouse or you're having an argument with a colleague, and you suddenly realize that you're quickly losing control of your temper, maybe a good time to completely stop, and then tell your colleague or your spouse that I'm going to take a break and come back to this discussion. Now, you may wonder that the other person may feel offended that you're stopping the conversation in between, but the reality is that that conversation anyway was not going to end up very well because you were getting angry and obviously you were not behaving appropriately. Now, when you are able to stop abruptly, it is giving you time to work with your emotions. So when you go back, give yourself a break, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and it gives you a little bit of time to think about it, to pause, to breathe, to pay attention to what is happening to your body. Then it will definitely help you. However, there are some long-term practices which have been studied and which have been found to help in a big way. And one of them is meditation. I think this is something that most of us may know about. So even 5 minutes of meditation in a single day is proved to have an impact on a calming impact on the mind, and it is proved to have an impact on the quality of sleep. So it improves the quality of sleep. Meditation is definitely so. Meditation is actually not just it is basically an opportunity to be with ourselves, and it is not about trying to control our thoughts, but meditation is about taking the opportunity to pay attention to what is happening with our brain, to pay attention to what kind of thoughts are coming and going, because often we are so caught up with our thoughts that we are not aware of what we are thinking. The thoughts just keep coming one after the other. But when we practice something like meditation, it gives us an opportunity to observe like a bystander, like an outsider, without getting angry that I'm thinking this way, without getting stressed that these are the thoughts which are running through my mind. So meditation is definitely one way to get a little handle over acute emotions. Taking a pause in the midst of an episode. So because whenever, for instance, something is provoking you and triggering you off, there's something called an emotional hijack, wherein if the brain decides that there is acute danger, then the information that comes through our eyes, ears, nose, etc., goes straight to the emotional mind instead of going to the thinking mind. And the emotional mind may decide that this information need not go to the thinking mind, and the emotional mind will give instructions for action, which could be slapping somebody, which could be taking action that you will regret at a later point of time. Okay, so even this act of trying to identify what you're feeling, if you're able to delay your reaction even by 6 seconds, that is a time required for the information to go from the emotional brain to the thinking brain. So when you take the time in the midst of a situation to think about what you're feeling and why you're feeling so, then it helps you to recover a little faster from the situation.
So we have the last question. I was wondering why all men are asking the questions and women are inherently emotionally intelligent, but we have our first. So Akansha wants to know that how to gauge when a particular situation comes to analyze or to just go by your gut feeling. I think what she's trying to ask is more about self-awareness and trusting your inner instinct, or an analysis of a particular situation. So how to manage oneself in such a situation?
Now this is a very broad question. There is no single answer to this. So if I say that just go with your gut feel, that's not true. The reality is that certain situations require us to analyze the facts and figures, and that actually helps us with what we feel. So for instance, if you are thinking, let's say it's a business decision, or let's say it's a personal decision, you are deciding whether to hire this particular person for a particular job on the personal end. The question is, how are you feeling about this person through your interactions? But at the same time, you want to be checking the background of the person in terms of what kind of expertise that person has. So the idea is to gather the facts and figures, have them handy, and at the same time pay attention to what you're feeling about the whole situation, and use both these to come to a conclusion or a decision.
All right. So thank you so much, Divya. I think with that we've actually overshot for our time, but I think a lot of interesting questions, and there was a Amazing talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for all those questions. That definitely kept me engaged. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure a lot of people, I mean, we are getting some really good comments, so I'm sure a lot of people found this useful. So thank you once again for doing this with us, and we really appreciate you taking time to speak to us and speak to the audience. And also a big thank you to the audience for attending this on a weekday and being engaged and also asking some really, really good questions. Um,
Absolutely.
right. So just to give you some instructions that the session has been recorded and the recording will actually be available on the alumni portal of your institute. So you can visit that and view this webinar at all times. We will also be sharing the slides with all the people who attended and registered, so you can also download them. We'll be providing you with the link. And thank you so much once again. Keep asking such questions and attending these webinars. It's very encouraging, and hopefully we can do many more such in the future. Be connected with your alumni association. And thanks a lot for joining again. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Thank you.